Good afternoon, everyone. As Helen said, my name is Paul Leggett. I'm the Director of Aging and Adult Services here for Salt Lake County, and I'm really excited for this panel this afternoon. We have some wonderful folks who are willing to share their expertise and tell us some of the things that they've seen, some of the best practices that they've uncovered in their careers, and how we can kind of use those to move things forward together. And we'll really just start with some introductions. So I'll ask each of you just to introduce yourselves and maybe give us a little bit of background as to some of your experience with planning for the aging community. So do we want to start on the end?
Sure. Okay, I think I may have to hold this here. It's a really loud mic. I'm Mark Shepard, I'm the mayor of Clearfield City. Those of you who don't know, it's about 20 miles north. We are an aging community. Most of our housing is from the 40s and 50s. We have some newer stock, but most of it is from the 40s or 50s. And as such, a large number of my residents. And so we are facing a situation now where our residents are quickly aging and trying to age in place for the most part, but are also looking for other options. And so we're trying to plan with that in mind.
I'm Alan Ormsby. I'm the state director for AARP in Utah. AARP has about 220,000 members. We focus on people 50 plus, but anybody can become a member at any age and take advantage of some of the things that AARP has to offer. We're really interested in livable communities and the age-friendly kind of approach to things, because we feel like if it's good for older adults, it's almost certainly good for everybody, right? A mom with a stroller, a person in a wheelchair, any of those people who need age-friendly accommodations. The world's just a nicer place when older folks can get around and receive the things that they need and make sure that they've got the services that they need. And you wanted a little bit of background too?
Yeah, that'd be
So I've been blessed to work in the field of aging in Utah for about 20 odd years. I came to Utah and was the legal services developer for the state of Utah. That's an attorney who works to try and find ways to benefit older adults and get other attorneys to do pro bono work. I did that for a while, and then was asked to be the director of the Division of Aging and Adult Services, and so I did that for a few years, and then was asked to be the director of the Division of Services for People with Disabilities. So I did that, and then came over to AARP about almost 14 years ago. Loved it.
Tim Sullivan. I've got a small urban planning and community planning firm called Township and Range that we're based downtown Salt Lake City. And a lot of my work, over the last 20 years has really focused on planning and design of walkable communities, especially really retrofitting a lot of the communities that we have and trying to make them more walkable and more multimodal. We often look at the intersection of public space and land use and that kind of multimodal walkable transportation. I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about the intersection of aging and transportation. A lot of what we do is our focus is what's known as active transportation. So when we're looking at walking, biking, using a mobility device, scooting, skating, what have you, human propelled transportation. And I think if you think about 10 years back or 15 years back, when you thought of active transportation, a lot of what you saw was that really kind of narrow bike lane right up against traffic that's going 40 miles an hour or faster, and it's not accessible to a lot of people. And so what you're starting to see now is you're hearing the phrase 8 to 80, and maybe honestly it should be 8 to 90, like 4 to 90, 4 to 100, whatever. Really thinking about that full range of ages and in terms of building networks for all kinds of people, all kinds of abilities. And so you've gone from a place where you think about that, really narrow bike lane on a really fast road to really exciting projects like the 9 line in Salt Lake City. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this project, but it's a really wide path that's buffered from traffic, where they slowed the road down, so you have traffic going slower, you have more space for more people scooting, skating, riding, moving along that corridor. And I think that's kind of where everything's headed. And it's exciting because it's starting to encompass more ages and abilities. And I think, this is just really just the beginning of this type of thinking in our infrastructure.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. And I think you'll agree we have some amazing expertise up here today. So I'm excited to kind of dig in a little bit on some of the things that you have experience with. And I'll start with you, Tim. You talked about active transportation. I just wonder if you can share with us some of the things that we really need to focus on in terms of active transportation when considering older adults.
So I'd actually like to pull out and go a little bit more big picture and think about the types of communities that we're building and the type of communities that we're, again, retrofitting, and think as we think about aging in place. I think a lot of the places here along the Wasatch Front and throughout America, I think the idea of that they've been really built as single family neighborhoods with kind of built for the automobile, with they might have some quiet streets around them, but really they're built for getting in and out by one transportation mode, and they're often one type of housing. So I think drawing the connection between the types of land use in our communities and the types of transportation is a really important place to start. And that pattern has really led to a lot of isolation, which really starts to manifest as people get older, feel more and more isolated because they have fewer options for getting around their communities, getting out of their communities, connecting among their communities. And so, I'd like to bring up the two ideas of diversity and connectivity as being really paramount to thinking about land use, housing, transportation, just neighborhoods in general, especially considering aging. I think that a diversity of especially housing types is critical because they represent the life cycle from, when you're in a family growing up, when you go out and you maybe have your first apartment, when you have a small family, and then you grow up and maybe you have a bigger family, maybe you have all different types of family household types kind of, and then when you age, maybe you want a smaller housing type. But aging, that notion of aging in community, aging in place, really is manifested through all these different housing types. And I think it's important to talk about that diversity because it means a diversity in transportation as well. That connection, when you have that diversity in both housing types and in land use, that it pairs really well with a diversity in ways to get around. So it's not just that you have to get in the car, single, basically having a single occupant vehicle ride in and out of your home to your place of work and around your neighborhood, but that you have an option to walk around, to take transit, to ride your bike, to scoot, whatever. And I think the other idea with connectivity is you have multiple ways to get around. Like you build a lot of redundancy into the network. So it's not just about if you are gonna, walk around your neighborhood, walk to work, walk to another neighborhood. You don't just have one way to get there, you have a lot of different ways. And so again, that connection between diversity and connectivity, I think is really paramount as we start thinking about this.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the terms that you mentioned, and we talk about quite a lot in the aging world, is aging in place. And I was wondering, Alan, if you can tell us, what does that mean? Why is it important? And what are some examples you've seen that really have enabled communities to help older adults age in place?
Yeah, aging in place is something that most people want. But it's broader than just saying, I want to live in my house forever. People want to be able to live in their neighborhoods where they're connected. I'll give you an example of my mom. She's 83. She lives in Taylorsville. She has one of those classic older homes where you walk in and it's the kitchen, it's the living room, and then upstairs are the bedrooms and bathroom, and downstairs are bedrooms and bathrooms. Well, at some point, her mobility is probably going to make it so that she can't live in that house anymore because she won't be able to go up and down the stairs for the bathroom, right? But she is so connected into that neighborhood in Taylorsville. So I don't think there's any question that she wants to stay in her neighborhood. Now, she may or may not be able to because the housing options, almost everything in her neighborhood is that kind of small home, split level, and so that may be very difficult for her to find a place like that. But aging in place is broader than just thinking about, is my home adequate for my needs? But it also does include that. We're working right now with USDA on, I think, hopefully a really exciting project going out into rural communities to be able to help people age in place by doing some home modifications. USDA has a lot of money. USDA is the Department of Agriculture. They have a lot of money that they can use for those kinds of projects. And everything that we can do to help people stay in their homes rather than having to go into an institutional setting, that definitely saves a lot of money because it's extremely expensive to go into an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility. So those are the kinds of things. I know that there are great communities throughout this state that are really working hard on figuring out ways to help people stay in their community, stay in their home so that they don't have to accumulate those kinds of big expenses.
That's great. Oh, it is working. I thought I had messed it up there. Thank you, Alan. I think that's a really interesting perspective. And you both talk about aging in place meaning something different to people and recognizing that diversity of older adults. But I do think one of the things that all of us, including older adults, have in common is the need for affordable housing, is a need, a place to call home and a safe place to call home. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about some of your work with affordable housing in your role as the mayor of Clearfield, and then some of the things that other cities maybe can take into consideration when considering affordable housing.
Yeah, there's the most challenging question, period, is I think is affordable housing. And what we've seen happen in the housing market doesn't just affect, those of us out shopping for it affects everybody. And we've gotten to a point where we have a lot of seniors that are looking to downsize, but can't because of what rates have done, because of what prices have done. And they're looking at something to say, how do I get into something less expensive where I can have a smaller payment in my retirement years? And it's just not there. And so how do we build for that? How do we get back to building smaller units? And I just finished this past year sitting on a housing supply accelerator with the National League of Cities and looking at where that supply is, and not just supply in general, but supply as individual components. And so how do we take care of the seniors? How do we take care of those first-time homebuyers, which quite often are identical and now competing for the exact same house? And so we have this rush of first-time homebuyers looking for a 1,500 square foot, one-level single house, and that is exactly what our seniors are looking for. And neither one of them can afford it right now. And so how do we build that better? How do we adjust what we're doing planning-wise to accommodate that as we bring more supply to the market and allow, hopefully, for that aging in place, but just to bring it in, do we look at smaller lots? Do we look at connected homes? Do we struggle right now to build condos. The financing for them isn't available. And so we're looking at single-family homes that are either very, very close together or attached, that are still attached at the garage, and you get 4 homes up against each other. And we've developed several communities that way that they function beautifully. But we're still talking about getting affordable. And in today's environment, new construction just isn't going to be. It is almost impossible to build what one would consider an affordable income level house. We've got 2 LIHTC projects, brand new developments within the city. One is, in both cases, they're both 4-story apartment complexes built with elevators specifically for that reason. LIHTC projects, the first one is 18% senior housing in there. We have 18% of the units are occupied by our senior citizens. Their income is less than, oh man, I have my notes somewhere, but we've got about, their income is a third, I think is the amount of the average rent in the LIHTC apartments. Of that 16 or the 18%, 65% of those are on vouchers. That's the only way that they're able to live. That means they're making less than $25,000 a year. How on earth do we find anything affordable for somebody making 25? Our other complex, they're making 36,000. How do you provide anything at an affordability level for somebody that's 36,000? It's just not there.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have a solution or anything like that, but I will talk about a couple of really creative things that we've seen work in other communities. And one is taking a lot that is, a larger lot, maybe has a third of an acre or even larger, and being able to subdivide that lot and put an accessory dwelling unit on one of those pieces. And Houston has done some really creative things where they've pulled their minimum lot size down. I believe they have no requirement whatsoever. And so in some of those average lot sizes are like 4,000 and 5,000 square feet. And they'll build a unit on that that's maybe a 2-level unit that's 1,100 or 1,200 square feet. And that's really increased the supply very in a good way. And accessory dwelling units are controversial sometimes, but I don't know that they need to be. And it would be really great if we could see opportunities. We talk to some older adults frequently where they want to build the accessory dwelling unit because they can build one that is ADA accessible and makes it very easy for them to get around in. They don't need much space. And so they want to be able to build the ADU and then rent the big house as income. And it'd be cool if we could see some of that stuff happen.
Isn't that funny? Because that's just the opposite of, more so at the legislature when we were talking ADUs, it wasn't, I want to live in the ADU. It was, this is rental income for me. And I need to be able to rent out my basement, or I need to build something in the back so I can rent it out. And what we need our cities to understand, one, that's the real need, is to be able to have them build for themselves. And two, to facilitate code that allows for it. Not just to say, hey, you can have an ADU. Our code is always as long as the lot size is there, we're okay. But the building fees, the inspection fees, the costs, the additional line for the sewer, instead of saying, oh, you can connect into the sewer from the house, no, you need a separate line because this was designed for this house and you need a whole separate, and all of a sudden the cost of building that ADU, it's just not worth it anymore to be able to even build it. We gotta find, that's our solution. I truly believe that is one of the biggest solutions we can have to affordable housing and aging in place at the same time, is to say, how do I use that space in my yard that is, I've had to mow for 20 or 30 years, that I'd really like to tear down that tree and put a house right here that I can get into and let my kids have the big house and rent. I can sell the big house to my kids and live here.
I think another thing to explore too is thinking about housing and transportation costs together, both from the side of the developer who maybe could build less parking, because parking is incredibly expensive to build, especially structured parking, especially underground parking. And so when you're given a break in terms of the cost of building that parking for, especially, senior living is, maybe the first kind of thing you go to that would maybe you could lower that parking ratio down. So that saves money. That's just an example of how that could save money. But also from the cost side of the resident, thinking about how building near a transit station, building those units by a transit station can save cost of owning a car, can help work with transportation demand management programs that could be initiated within that city or within that activity center or something that could help save cost on getting different ways to get around, and then again pairing that with more walkability, with more connectivity throughout the neighborhood. So thinking about those housing and transportation costs together, I think really is one way to frame this a little bit, this affordability. Some of the ways that the challenges you've outlined, there's going to be no one solution. It's going to take the multiple solutions to kind of get at that.
That's really interesting. And I was going to kind of ask a follow-up question to you there. What is the solution? Like, if we've got this reluctance from cities, from the legislature to kind of entertain some of these opportunities for older adults to have safe and accessible housing, how do we overcome that? What do we need to employ to really change the perspective on this kind of work?
I think right now, as the legislature meets, it is driven down to the cities. It is a legislature deciding what's going to work. That, from a city standpoint, is the hardest thing to ever accept, is to say, you, Mr. Legislator, you, Mr. Senator, you're telling me how to deal with housing in my city. That's not acceptable. But if it's going to be a fight, then as cities, we need to come to the table with the ideas and say, this is what is palatable. This is what we feel we can do. Because I can get that past my council anytime if it came from our group. But if it's you telling me how to do it, there's an immediate wall that goes up that says, how dare you? My job, and I was elected to create a community and to create a sense of place. And the people that have moved into my city, this is what they want. Well, that's true. But if you talk to the people in your community and ask them about aging in place, and asking, what are you doing with those who are aging, and where are they going to live, and where are your mom and dad going to live? Now that perspective changes a bit. And what are you doing with affordability? How do you address it? So cities are coming up with ideas, and we're getting there. Part of it's been mandated that they come up with ideas, and again, that becomes even harder. Cities just need to come to the table and say, look, this will work. We're willing. Here's our idea, and then start from there as a talking point.
That's great. And I think we learned this morning, we're the youngest nation in the state. We're the youngest state in the nation, I should say, sorry. And the opportunity that gives us to look at what has already been done. What lessons can we learn about what worked, what didn't work? Are there any examples of things that any of you can share, of things that you've seen in other parts of the country that have worked, that really have moved that needle away from it feels like sometimes we're always talking about the problem, but not as willing to engage in the solution aspect of it. And I wonder if you have any examples where that solution has been embraced and we've seen real change.
I've got a couple of ideas from around the country that I've seen. I'm lucky enough to serve on AARP's rural strategies. So I get to see a lot of really cool things that are being done in rural communities. And one of the best that I've seen is in Vermont. They created a brand new Main Street. The Main Street had basically died. And one of the big reasons was they had these logging trucks that were coming through at 35 miles an hour. I don't know if you've ever heard a logging truck come through, but it's a very loud, very scary kind of sound. And the speed limit was 35. And so the folks worked with a group called 880 Cities, and they created a brand new downtown. They put traffic calming. They dropped the speed limit to 10 miles an hour. And you would have thought that the truckers would have been very upset, right? No, they were fine, because it was only half a mile that they had to slow down like that. They put in new benches for seating. They put in planters and trees and made it much more attractive. And then they brought in, local crafts people to be able to sell their wares. And it really created a brand new feeling for that downtown. And the walkability issue, I loved what you were talking about with walkability. You might think, older adults don't care about walkability. But we've done research on it, and that's one of the main drivers for people wanting to move into a different kind of community is they want to be able to walk and they want to feel safe. And so all of a sudden in Vermont, instead of being terrified when trucks came plowing through at 35 miles an hour, now they felt safe and they felt comfortable, and they brought their kids and they brought the older adults out. And so things like that seem like it's a kind of minor change can really make some great changes. And I love Salt Lake City, I think, is doing some really amazing things. They have that where they close off Main Street and bring in, trees and all of that. I think it's incredibly exciting. People are doing some really creative things here in Utah. I love to see it.
I think a lot of the walkability solutions, walkable streets that are going to appeal to, people aging, are the same ones that appeal to people of all age ranges. It really gets into that universality of a walkable community. I think there's some details that of a walkable environment or bikeable environment, just good active transportation environments that specifically are good for aging. I think just generally creating a slow environment in general is really good for all modes. Just even seniors, people are aging, driving need more time to react. So slow environments are just good in general for people using all modes. Making sure that things are clear, that things are direct. Thinking about how when you walk, oftentimes when it's designed so that the driving route has the kind of the direct priority, and then the walking route has to kind of snake around and go up and over and this and that. But especially when you're aging, having a clear, direct route is really important, and really can make the difference between you making that trip and not making that trip. Maybe not overly cluttering the environment with too many signs that making it really intuitive. And you asked about examples, and so it actually occurred to me as I was thinking through this that one place I'd been recently that kind of fit in with all of this was I took a trip to the Netherlands this summer and rode around Utrecht with an architect and planner, and she was telling me that these are the exact same things that they're thinking of. They're thinking of creating this uncluttered environment where they try to put most of their signage actually on the pavement, so it just keeps a really clean, look, and everything is. They try to make the biking and the walking the most direct, and if the drivers have to drive around, they do that. And it's a social environment too. It's not just utilitarian. I think this is really important, especially for people aging that want, they have free time. They want to be able to walk with friends and family. And so the Dutch are like that too. The Dutch design their bike paths so that you can ride two abreast, and so you can talk while you're riding. And sure enough, when you go to places like Utrecht and Amsterdam, you see a lot of people of all ages riding bikes. You see people probably in their 70s, 80s, riding bikes like it's no big deal. And so I think those details of the built environment really matter when it's all added up, and it communicates to people that that people of all ages are really welcome to walk, bike, scoot, whatever, use mobility devices, on these streets.
I thank you for sharing that, and I think it's really interesting sometimes to look at what's happening elsewhere, including in different countries. I think there's a lot of things that are happening in Europe that really are lessons that we can learn, kind of that communal housing of college students and older adults. And I have to share something funny. I was also in Amsterdam last year, and my family and I were walking through the city, and we needed to find a restroom. We found a restroom, and my wife came out. She said, "Oh, that's a senior center." And I was like, "It's a senior center?" She's like, "You're going to go in there now, aren't you, and talk to people?" And I was like, "Yes, I absolutely am going to pause our vacation to go and learn about this amazing senior center." Because at Salt Lake County, we run a lot of senior centers, and it was a different feel. It was a different type of intentionality than I have seen sometimes with the things that we're doing. So I think that opportunity to learn and that opportunity to look at best practices is one that's really going to serve us well, especially as we kind of have two charges in front of us right now. We have the need to support and serve older adults today, but we also have the responsibility to create what we need for the next generation. I think was shared earlier by Danielle. If we're not aging, the alternative is that we're not here any longer, and so we're designing our own communities. What would the three of you say are some of the things that we really need to take into account when thinking about not only services today, but about what's to come?
Those that are aging today, that are our aging population in the future, we're a whole different group of people. And I don't know, I'd love to say I know exactly how to do that, because my kids will be aging, and my oldest son's 35 years old. And I look at him and think, okay, what does aging look like for him? He is active, more active than I am. He's the electronics are his life. I mean, he is connected. He doesn't need that you and me, because his connection is virtual. So that being near your neighbor and in being in that neighborhood and needing that connection isn't him. And so how do I plan for him? That's that future I'm looking for. He needs trails, he needs roads, he needs the ability to get around. But I think that kid at 90 will be on a scooter. He has no fear. I can't get my wife onto a scooter, but he'll zip right by. And I think he'll be there forever. So I think it's really looking forward and asking that generation, what does this look like? As you age, not me deciding, because I can see it from my lens, but I can't see it from yours. What does aging look like for you? And he'll probably tell me I'm never getting old. And he probably won't, because he's obstinate. But at some point, he is going to have that he's going to have to answer that question. What it looks like for me is very different than what it looked like for my parents.
I think that's fascinating, and I'm interested what both of you have to say. That one of the things that you said that is something that always sticks out to me is when I think about my own aging, is that at some point in time, all being well, me and my children will be older adults at the same time. We're very different today, and those differences aren't going to go away just because we're kind of in that older adult generation. So it was shared earlier, the difference in those generations, and when the Gen X is going to start retiring and the millennials are going to start retiring. How do we make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of those communities at the same time? We're going to have a generation 60, we're going to have a period of 60 plus where there's going to be multiple generations with multiple needs, with multiple expectations, with multiple goals. How do we get there in terms of robustness of delivering services in a way that meets all of those needs?
I think about this a lot because my son is 22 and my daughter is 17. And they talk about, how they view the future. And they're pretty scared, frankly. They're worried about raising children in an environment where climate is rapidly changing and not for the better. Pollution is rapidly changing and not for the better. I think the older generations need to put the younger generations as a priority always, and think about the way that the world is going to be left for them. It's interesting that our older adults at AARP, when we ask some of the things that they're most interested in as far as the legislature goes, you might be surprised to know that education is probably the number one thing. They care deeply about the funding that is available for education. Why? Well, they're not going and taking elementary school classes. They're not teaching elementary school typically, but they care deeply about their grandkids and their great-grandkids, and they want to be sure that the world that we're leaving them is a good world, right? So I think that multi-generational approach sometimes gets missed, and people talk about, the older generation is being pitted against the younger generation somehow, and housing is certainly one of those, because as you were mentioning, people get caught in, I had a couple of good conversations with folks this week about my mortgage rate right now is so good. If I died, I want to be sure that my mortgage gets carried over. How do I do that, right? So people are thinking about how to stay in their housing because the economy and the mortgage rates are so good right now. But how does that impact the younger generation? How does that make it less likely that they can afford things? I think another soapbox I'll just jump on real quick is from 1970 on, the productivity gains in our economy have been a very beautiful upward trend. The wages, which are typically tied to productivity, have been relatively flat. And I think as a country, we need to say, hey, young people, we need to pay you what you're worth. And stop with, saying, oh, millennials are lazy and Gen Zs are entitled. And I don't see that. I see great people who work with me and work for me, and they're incredible. And we need to pay them what they're worth.
That's great. Thank you, Tim.
I would, one of the words I've heard here today is ecosystem. And so, ecosystem to me implies connectivity. And I think looking out, especially when you think about the transportation situation, I see a lot of fragmentation. You and I were talking about that. If you think about the transit kind of situation for people aging, there's just a lot of different needs. We talked about needs to go to doctor's appointments, but also just those kind of like needs to get groceries and see family. So increasingly, people aging are relying on other people to give them that that transportation, those rides. Some of it, yes, is you can walk to some things, but you're ultimately going to need some rides to places. And the situation right now is there's a lot of different providers, both in the public sector, nonprofits, private sector, that provides those rides, whether it's UTA, whether it's Salt Lake County, whether it's private, nonprofits or companies that are providing those rides. And a lot of them, they're very disconnected. And so there's been kind of this, increasingly it's mobility ecosystem term has been thrown around that how do we kind of coordinate all this transportation? Because there's people fall through the gaps between fixed route transportation with UTA and UTA paratransit. So when they don't necessarily meet up, people need both of them. People might not qualify for paratransit, but they might need it. So there's this whole ecosystem right now that's pretty fragmented. So how do we make those connections going forward? How do we use technology for the greatest benefit? Right now, technology is great for some things. So like the on-demand transportation that technology has enabled is really promising, I think, for aging populations. Because it can kind of target the rides that you need, when you need them, where you need them a little bit more than just a fixed route bus. However, technology can be challenging. It can put up some barriers and roadblocks in kind of accessing those things. So how do we use kind of the best parts of technology to then make those connections for the mobility ecosystem going forward? I think that's something to really think about as technology changes, whatever, by the month, by the week, by the year. And so how do we harness that to increase the connectivity of those ecosystems?
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. The advent of technology has really enabled us to be better at delivering some services, but it's also taken away some of those opportunities for older adults, especially when we think about things like social isolation. We see that there are many older adults dealing with that. And you had mentioned there's these fragmented services. There's kind of what we do, there's UTA, and often these are focused on providing support to some of our lowest income, most vulnerable older adults. Well, where I see some challenges, both now and in the future, is that population that kind of fits between those that have resources. They're able to do things for themselves. There are those that qualify for programs such as my agency runs, but then there's this large part of that population that are kind of stuck. They don't really have the resources to do what they want to do in terms of intentional aging, but they don't qualify for support programs. What do we do? How do we support those folks to be able to age in place and to age with intention? Just an easy question. So
yeah, really easy to solve that one. I think a lot of it is planning for the future. There's so much good information out there about how to prepare for yourself aging or for your parents aging, but we tend to ignore it until there's a crisis. So if, organizations like AARP with 220,000 members, we have to do a better job of getting information into the hands of people to help them plan and prepare and be ready so that when the crisis happens, you're 3 steps ahead. Because that's what we see mostly is, somebody has a crisis and then all of a sudden they're trying to figure out where the resources are. It's exhausting to try and figure out where those resources are. And so you're so busy dealing with the moment to moment that you're not able to access Meals on Wheels because you have no idea how to go about doing that. You may not even know that Meals on Wheels exists. So being sure that we have adequate resources for organizations like yours, for the Division of Aging and Adult Services, making sure that the, people who are actually providing the services have the funds that they need to provide those services.
Anything to add?
Well, he hit it right on the head. I was just going to say, show me the money, because that's where it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's the big barrier that we see is the ability. There's many ideas. There's many things we can do to support older adults, but getting that from an idea to happening is many. And that's one of the biggest challenges we see. I'll end by asking one question to all of you. So today we've had this opportunity to talk a lot about some of the issues facing older adults in communities as communities change and as they grow. What's your biggest hope as a result of today? What do you hope happens next? And Im, I'll start with you. Or I can start at the other end if you need just a moment.
You want to start?
Sure. I would hope that we start looking forward. We sit in the present way too often, and it is, as you were just saying, it's a crisis. We've done that with housing. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden we have a housing crisis, and prices are astronomical, and interest rates are incredible. Well, so let's deal with it. Well, any solution that we find with that is 10 years down the road. By the time we see the results of it, we have to face that same thing right now with an aging population, and we have to start looking forward and dealing with it today. And a lot of that, again, is holding to our guns and saying we're going to do this. With the mobility factor, I mean, we had Wasatch Front Regional Council help come in and replan our downtown area and our entire State Street, and along there is a wonderful bike route. Well, we're a completely developed community, and so none of this can happen until Clearfield redevelops. And it is, and it's redeveloping wonderfully, but it's a piece at a time, and sometimes it's mid-block. And so when I tell a developer, well, you got to build a bike lane in front of your space here, and here's how wide your sidewalk's going to be, and then you're going to have this buffer zone, and then you're going to have this bike lane, and their question to me is, but it doesn't connect to anything. Yeah, I know. Well, I don't want to build it then.
Not yet.
But yeah, but eventually it will connect to something. Yeah, but right now it just stops. And I get that. But they'll do theirs next, and they'll connect to it. I just hope we'll start looking forward and look at those solutions that we need to have, and not stop, and not say, well, things are great, well, because it doesn't connect to a sidewalk today. How do we fix this for tomorrow?
I love that. I just think that's fabulous to look forward. I think, building off what Helen said, that we stop thinking about the silver tsunami, and we start thinking about what's the most fun at a beach. Well, it's surfing, it's body surfing, whatever it is, it's catching a wave, right? So if we think of aging as a wave, yeah, we've got to do some swimming. We got to get out in the water. We got to paddle a little bit so that we get on top of that wave. But if we do it right, that's the fun. That's the joy, right? Older adults have so much to offer, and they are not a drain on, resources and an economy. They really can be a real spark of inspiration for, various communities. And hopefully we really do come out of this with some really cool ways of thinking about things differently. So that's my hope.
I would say a lot of these things that we've been talking about, these potential solutions, are just good things to do in general, and I think they serve not just aging adults, but also the broader community in general. And so my hope would be that, in focusing on this, it's another really critical lens for I think promoting some of these solutions that I think make sense across a broad spectrum.
That's great. And I want to thank you all today for sharing your expertise, sharing your ideas. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. We do have time for some questions, so I'm just going to look at Ryan, and she's going to make that happen.
Thank you. Okay, do we have questions from the audience for the panelists?
So I was thinking this morning when we were listening to, and I don't want to do this name correctly, Dijon Eskic, when he was giving that demographic information and about the housing and things like that. And so me and my husband are 100% one of those people like trapped in our home, right? I don't have a mortgage, and that's a huge luxury. Like, that makes it so you don't have to have as much monthly income, but yet this is a home that in reality could be a starter home for somebody because it's not a massive, enormous house, and it could be a starter home for a family. Well, like they said, I'm not moving out because the problem is I can't sell my house and move into anything that's new, that's without going probably $200,000 more in debt. So in other words, I'd have to get a mortgage for $200,000 to cover the difference in what I would want. And I'm talking like 1,000 square feet with a garage. Like, I'm not talking about something extremely extravagant here. So is anybody thinking of, when we're talking affordable housing, of, okay, can we build for the aging population as opposed to the younger population with families, and try to get those families into these older homes that are bigger, have a yard, those things, and get the aging adults out into, townhomes and condos and things that are maybe more affordable. And I mean, because when you're older, I don't need a yard necessarily, and it's great to have the community taken care of, things like that. Is anybody looking at that, or is that just a pipe dream?
Yes and yes. We're looking at it, but again, I think it really is the same. I mean, as I deal on a regular basis, daily basis with first-time home buyers, and they're looking for no lot. They want small house. They're okay, though, going vertical. Totally fine, whereas the aging population's not. They can't. And so how do we, what policies can we look at that say, okay, there's some preference, or we build specifically for a certain population? I have begged builders to start building 55 and older communities again, and I can't get them to do it. And I don't understand that. And I think, again, it's going to that first-time homeowner mentality of let's go after that population, but I don't want to limit it to 55 and older. From a real estate standpoint, I can't find anything for a client that's 55 and older, and that's affordable. Will never be a word we'll ever use again. Attainable for that, because they're all sitting in that exact same situation. The situation I'm in, that you're in, that, yeah, I mean, I can't leave. I'm going to age in place because I'm probably going to die in my basement because I can't get back up the stairs. And it's a terrible feeling to say, where do I go? Because I can't go here without picking up a mortgage for $200,000 for another 30 years that I won't be here, that I have to now leave to my kids.
So AARP has a lot of information on what we call missing middle housing. It's those quadplexes and the duplexes and the cottage courts and the 800 square foot park homes that you can get from a manufactured housing now that are a couple $100,000 instead of $600,000. I don't know any good solutions, but there are some things that could potentially be good ideas. One thing I heard that I think is really cool is the idea of a land trust where people can buy a house, but they actually don't buy the land underneath it. And so as the house raises in value, you can take some of that equity, but the land actually belongs to the trust. So you don't have to pay the extra whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars it is for the land. You're just buying the house. So there's some cool things that are out there, trends that are exciting, but I don't know that there's a magic bullet. It's almost got to be an all of the above strategy.
I will say this, and I'll leave it with this. When we started talking a while back about the fact that builders have not built starter homes, and that's our problem, man. We've got to start building starter homes again. We stopped building starter homes, and there was a lot of blame on the cities saying, well, cities, you should have allowed starter homes, and you need to change your policy so that you can allow starter homes. During that time frame, over the last 10 years, I have not had a developer come to my city and say, I want to build starter homes. I want to build small 1,200 square foot single-family houses on, a tenth of an acre. Nobody has come to me asking, and that is because builders will build what the demand is. If the market is asking for that retirement home, that final home, that smaller 1,500 square foot with just enough big open space that I can bring all of my kids and grandkids back and have a big bed. I have one bedroom in the back, and that's for me. If that's what the market demands, that is exactly what developers will build because there's somebody to buy it.
I have a question. So we hear a lot about the value of transit-oriented communities. Does that type of development, what are the opportunities or challenges with using that type of development to support older adults looking to age in their communities?
I think it's great as long as they're built to accommodate that. And we are. I mean, we're in the process of developing a front runner station that's 60 acres. And we're dense. I mean, it's 1,000 housing units in there. But it's designed so that every single building has elevators, everything is accessible, wide sidewalks, businesses around that they can get to, and then crossing our state street, a bridge to actually get them to the other side of our busiest street with an elevator on both sides of the bridge. So it's a mobility issue, and how do we get them out and about? That also connects to our aquatic center and fitness center so that they have access to there, and it's all within that one area. So it can be done. It's just planning.
I think it's mostly opportunity, and I think a lot of the zoning aspects and development standards that would go with good transit-oriented development, planning, and zoning would really, I think, apply to a lot of these smaller, more walkable units that are then connected to transit, and I think the affordability is important to consider as well. Kind of what had brought up about if you look at not just the housing cost, but the housing plus transportation cost. Because, I think being that close to transit and being able to use it for, as long as the transit is, physically accessible for people, being able to use it for a lot of your needs, as well as all the connecting transit. Because when you think about the transit stations, ideally those are a nexus of all sorts of different services of, the on-demand shuttles, the flex routes, the fixed routes, other kind of transportation services. So living close to a transit station like that can then put you in the middle of all those connected services. And I think, there's incentives to decrease parking if TOD is done right. So I think it really is mostly an opportunity to do that. I think especially with aging populations, there's just some extra challenges that, typical, a lot of what's being built in transit station areas maybe isn't addressing. So there's just some extra things that I think, might be needed and other things to think about. And I think, things like this are good because as those of us that are kind of planning those transit station areas, think about this is good because we can think more about specifically planning for aging populations when we think about TODs. I think it just makes those areas all the better.
Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me of a story that you, Paul, told me when we were first talking about planning this event, about trying to kind of do a tour, I think it was, with some of your clients and trying to get people to the transit station in and of itself, going across the tracks lines with walkers was incredibly difficult. So trying to find ways to conduct these projects that have older people in mind is great. And AARP has a lot of resources on that. Walk audits, they have a whole toolkit on how to create walk audits that is a really great guide that I suggest planners look at.
I think one other thing, we talked a lot about housing, but we haven't really talked about other, land uses as well. Brian, you mentioned third places, just any senior centers, other destinations. It's the other real opportunity of planning around these transit stations, is really trying to retrofit our environment so that all these destinations are close to housing, so that we really don't even have to think about even using transit. You can just walk, and so that basic land use planning aspect, I really think we should make sure we consider as well.